Welcome to the Plain Faith Podcast, Episode 3.
Some of the airstrips are the most challenging in the world. They're literally hanging off the sides of mountains. They have slopes up to 19%, and some of the airstrips are as short as 300 meters or 900 feet. And on takeoff, we have to decide whether we're going to take off the moment we release our brakes.
The Plain Faith Podcast is a podcast about missionary aviation and the stories of missionary aviators who have taken seriously Jesus' command to go and make disciples of all nations and are using airplanes to be his witnesses at the ends of the earth. Thank you for joining us for this episode. Your host for today's show will be Jimmy Tidmore, who, in addition to hosting this podcast, is a pastor and a pilot, residing with his family in what is known as the Rocket City, Huntsville, Alabama. He is very interested in promoting missionary aviation and helping prospective missionary pilots reach the mission field. And now, with these introductions out of the way, let's get started on another great episode of the Plain Faith Podcast.
Welcome to the Plain Faith Podcast. My name is Jimmy Tidmore, and I want to thank you for joining us for this episode of the show. I am very excited about our episode for today, but I am also very excited about how well this podcast has been received so far. I appreciate everyone who has let me know how much they are enjoying it. I'm thankful for the reviews that have been left so far in iTunes. Those really help us get the word out about the show, so thank you to those who have helped in that way. And if you are enjoying the show and haven't left us a review yet, hit the pause button and head over to iTunes right now and do that for me. I'd really appreciate it. Also, I want to say thank you to everyone who has helped spread the word with your friends and family on social media. This is definitely the best way you can help with the show. So thank you for being a part in that way and helping out. I really do appreciate it. But now it's time to turn our attention to today's guest. His name is Fran Burgess, and he's a missionary pilot serving with his family in Papua New Guinea. And I'm confident you are going to enjoy hearing him tell his story. Fran, I'm very excited about having you on this episode of the podcast. I am really looking forward to hearing about how God led you and your family to Papua New Guinea and about the work you are doing there. So welcome to the Plain Faith Podcast. I thank you so much for joining us for this episode.
No, the pleasure's all mine. Thank you for inviting me. I'm looking forward to this.
Great. Well, let's begin by getting into the questions about yourself and your family. For example, where are you from? Where did you grow up? And so forth.
Sure. My dad was in the Air Force, so when I was young, we traveled around quite a bit. But eventually, we settled down in San Antonio, Texas. It's probably not what you're thinking. My dad wasn't a pilot, so that's not how I really became interested in aviation. He was a dentist, so I didn't really grow up around planes at all, but I always appreciated looking at them from the ground. And my parents weren't Christians when I was first born, but they became Christians when I was quite young. And I thought it was really neat for me to see them grow as believers as I grew up. And what a blessing that was for me.
Did you have brothers and sisters?
Oh, yeah, I had two brothers, and one older and one younger, so I'm in the middle.
And now you're married, right?
Yeah, so I've been married for almost 15 years to my wife, Janice, who happens to be a missionary kid from Bolivia, South America. And we have two kids, an 8-year-old son and a 5-year-old daughter.
All right. Tell us about how you became a follower of Jesus.
Yeah, that's a good question. I put my faith in Jesus when I was quite young. Like I said, grew up in a Christian household. My parents loved God and raised me to love God as well. And I believe I put my faith in Him quite young, around 5 or 6 years old. But my life was really to please my parents and not to get in trouble. So it wasn't for for good reasons. It was all for selfish reasons, so I wouldn't be in trouble. But after getting close to graduations, high school graduation, I realized I was just kind of floundering, trying to seek my own thing after high school. I bounced from college to college, trying to find out what to do with my life. All along in the back of my mind, I was thinking, I knew God was calling me to some type of ministry, but that's not what I really wanted it to do. So I just kept pursuing my own desires, and that's just to make money and have an American life. But I was unhappy and just couldn't find peace anywhere. So I was in college, and I was working with the youth at our church there. And I finally just asked my youth pastor, who I was helping out with, what should I do? And he said, why don't you just go try a small Bible college that I attended in Alabama and see where God leads you from there. So I finally said, Lord, you are good, and you know what's good for my life, and I will submit, and I'll take the first step to ministry. Still not sure what you or where you're going to have me go, but I'll go, and ended up going to Southeastern Bible College in Birmingham, Alabama.
All right. And so tell me about your call to missions and your passion for aviation and how those two things developed and then how they came together.
So when I was at Southeastern Bible College, I met Janice there, and that's where we got married. But meanwhile, the whole time when I was going to school there, I had no idea really where God was pointing me. Janice's dad is a church planner, and he's very outgoing, and he's talented in that way. I looked up to him, but I knew that that's not how I could serve. And so during a trip to go visit her parents in Bolivia, we went to go visit the church, the first church he planted in a really remote village, and we had to take a mission airplane out. And on our way out, it was funny because there was a lot of storms around, and it was really windy. And as we took off in the Cessna 206, I was seated right next to the pilot. He let me sit up front next to him, and the wind was just throwing us all around. And Janice and her mom were in the back seat, terrified and thinking that the plane may go down at any moment. And meanwhile, I was up in the front seat, loving it and having a blast. And at that moment, that's when the light bulb came on and said, "Hey, this is something you could do, and you could serve me by flying airplanes and helping others." And so through that, I started to think about it. And when we landed, even despite the rough flight, Janice came up to me and afterwards and said, I think you should be a missionary pilot. And so from there on, we started to pursue that and started headed toward that direction. I graduated from Southeastern Bible College and went directly from there to Moody Aviation, which had just moved to Spokane, Washington at the time. And so I started my flight training there.
Was that the first time you had been in a small plane?
Yeah, it actually was the first time in a small airplane.
First time in a small airplane, and everyone thought you were going to die, and yet that's how you were called to do that sort of thing. That's pretty cool. Your call to missions and your call to missionary aviation are really then one and the same. You had felt that God was leading you to some sort of ministry. You didn't know what. You went to Southeastern Bible College in Birmingham, and you go on this trip, and at the same time, it becomes clear to you that missions work and missionary aviation are one and the same. Am I summarizing all that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Most of my fellow missionary aviators start off flying, and then they pursue missions. I was kind of the opposite, where I started flying to go do missions. So yeah, it's a little bit different than others, but yeah, I feel that that's just how God called me into missions. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. And I like to hear about everyone's call to the mission field because they're all a little bit different. And I think it's important for people listening to the show to understand that there's not really a stereotypical way that it happens. It happens uniquely for each individual, and you have to be sensitive to how God is leading you based on your personalities and your personality traits and your giftings and so forth. And don't be looking necessarily at how God did it with someone else. He will call you and lead you in the way that is best for you. So I appreciate you sharing that story. I would like to ask you if you have any other advice for someone who is wrestling with a call to missions, maybe listening to this episode. Is there any help that you could give them as they are working through that? It sounds like you sort of struggled through it for a time, and I wonder if you have any advice or tips that you could give to folks who are doing the same thing.
Yeah, I just want to say when I was jumping around from one college to the other, trying to do my own thing, but at that time I had no peace. I knew God was calling me to some type of ministry, but I just kept running because, I wanted to pursue my own desires. But once I decided to obey God, I had this peace and joy that filled me that I had never felt before, and it was refreshing. And following Christ on this crazy journey has not always been easy, and it has been difficult and full of trials, but I wouldn't have it any different way because there's so much contentment and fulfillment when you're in God's will.
Right. So once you finally said, okay, I hear you, and I'm going to go in this direction, although I'm not exactly sure where you're leading me yet, but I know that you're leading me into some type of ministry work. There was a clear confirmation just from the peace that you had inside. Is that correct?
Exactly.
So you go with your new bride to see her parents in Bolivia. You take this airplane ride that really, I think, without being too dramatic, it changed the direction of your life, I guess we could say. From there, I know you went to Moody, but that wasn't immediate, right? You were still at Southeastern Bible College. Did you pursue aviation in any other way and before you got to Moody, or did you wait until you got to Moody to do any official training?
I waited until I was officially at Moody, until I started officially training. So I waited about it. From the moment we decided before getting to Moody was about 2 years.
And so tell us about your flight training experience at Moody. Obviously, probably most of the listeners know by now that Moody is a great school, and lots of missionary aviators on the mission field today have trained there. But tell us about your flight training experience there.
I would say the flight training at Moody is excellent. It's intense for sure, and there are days when you're exhausted, but I think the experience is second to none. The training's second to none. They have flight instructors that have served all over the world, so you're getting a vast array of experience. Not only do they care that you become a good pilot, but they care that you are a godly person, and they train you in that way. And it's a great school. It's not the only school, but it's a great school. You start off with 2 years of maintenance, and then you do 2 years of flight, and in between or all around there, you're getting Bible classes. So you're always involved in some type of Bible class throughout your training.
Okay, so how did the maintenance side go, and how did the flying side go, and which one was the most difficult, and which one was the easiest, I guess?
Yeah, the maintenance went well, although I am glad I'm a pilot. I don't think I could do maintenance full time, although I know there's those out there who love maintenance, and I'm glad for it because I'd rather be up in the air flying. But it was a great experience learning how things work. I think it makes you a good pilot to know how your airplane is designed and runs and works. The 2 years of flight were great. They're full days. I think there's a couple semesters where we started at 5:30 in the morning and didn't end until about 4 or 5 in the afternoon.
Oh, goodness.
But it was a great experience. I really enjoyed it. I would recommend it to anyone who wants to do mission aviation for a career. Yeah.
So when you finished at Moody, about how many flight hours did you have?
I had close to, I think, 350, 400 hours thereabouts. Yeah.
Did you need to build more time after you finished Moody?
Yeah, that's an interesting story in itself. When we decided to go with Wycliffe, they require at least 500 hours. So I had about 150 hours to make up. And so when we moved back to Birmingham, I was looking for a flying job. And I applied to Auburn University to instruct there. And at the time, the chief pilot was a former missionary pilot from Africa. And he saw my resume and he said, I don't have room for you now, but maybe in a couple of months we can work you in. And so I waited around a couple of months, and then eventually he called me back, and I got a job at Auburn, and I had my 500 hours in one semester. So it happened real quick. So that was a really cool thing.
So you built your 500 hours up, and then you knew at that point that you wanted to go with Wycliffe already? You had zeroed in on Wycliffe?
That's correct. That's correct. Janice and I, we had talked about which organization we should join, and we know there's all these great organizations out there. So it was one of our hardest decisions to figure out, but we really just felt like, man, the Bible is such an important thing, and that we really want people to know that God loves them by being able to read or hear the Word of God in their own language. And so we felt really convicted and passionate about that. So that's how we decided to join Wycliffe Bible Translators.
Okay, and help me understand, help the listeners understand how Wycliffe and JARS are related and so forth.
Oh, yeah, good question. I always get that question, so it's a good one. So Wycliffe is the organization you're joining. JARS is the training organization and technical support. So they provide technical support for the translators or other missionaries on the field, as well as training. So they help further train the pilots as well. So Moody is a great school, but the places we fly are quite intense and quite different from the places in the U.S. So we need extra training and some extra support as well here when we fly.
Okay, so Wycliffe is the organization, but JARS is the part of that organization or a group that's affiliated with Wycliffe that gets you ready to actually fly on the mission field. Is that correct?
Correct. So Wycliffe is the organization, and JARS is a support branch of Wycliffe.
Okay, and Wycliffe's primary focus is Bible translation and getting Bibles into languages and even helping people develop written languages who do not have it so they can have a Bible in those languages. Is that right?
That is correct. That is correct.
Yes, just a great organization, and I can certainly see why you would feel led in that direction. And you are absolutely correct to say there's many really good missionary aviation organizations, and they sort of have maybe slightly different focuses. And Wycliffe's is very much on the Bible translation side. So that's something that is very important to me as well. And I'm glad to hear that is where you're serving. Now, why don't you tell us, though, about the process? So you and your wife, Janice, realize, hey, we really feel that Bible translation is important. We really feel it's important that people from all over the world have the Bible in their own language, and so that's where we want to serve. But what was the process? You get on at Auburn University and cross that 500-hour mark in a single semester, and then what's the process from Auburn to getting actually on board with Wycliffe and to the mission field?
So after that first semester, I went and took a technical evaluation at JARS, which we fly and do maintenance, and they just evaluate us, see how well we are at learning or adapting to new things. You get to fly a wonderful airplane called the Helio Courier. Not very many out there, but a very challenging but fun airplane to fly. So if you ever get a chance, I would recommend it. And then, so once you pass that, you're invited to join Wycliffe, and you join Wycliffe, and then you go through some courses to help you learn more about Wycliffe and more about what you are going to be doing, and then you have to raise your own support as Wycliffe missionaries. So we spent about a year and a half doing that. I was working at Auburn still at that time, and we were actually headed to Cameroon, Africa at that time. That's where they needed us, and so we went off to France to learn French, because that's what they speak in Cameroon. And while there, we had I call it God's speed bump to slow us down, and we were told that we didn't need to go to Cameroon anymore, and that they wanted us to go to Papua New Guinea. And we don't look at that time as a waste, but we felt like it was God preparing us for our time here in Papua New Guinea and getting us ready to serve here.
Okay. Before we go on and talk about the mission field, I'd like maybe for you to tell us a little bit about, you went to your technical evaluation. What are they looking for in a pilot candidate? Are there specific characteristics, specific things about the way they handle the airplane that they are sort of on the lookout for before they invite you to join the organization?
Yeah, they're looking for someone who's professional, someone who strives for excellence. We all know that perfection is not obtainable here on Earth, but we should strive to be as good and as excellent as we can be. I'm looking for someone who can learn on their own. So as you're flying the Helio, they're going to ask you to do a maneuver, and then the next day they're going to ask you to do the same maneuver and see if you do that maneuver better than you did it the day before. They're looking for a teachable attitude, someone who is willing to learn and take instruction, and also someone who just has a heart to serve.
Okay, so are there things that you could say maybe to someone who feels like maybe God is leading them to missionary aviation? Maybe there's even someone listening to this show who's in training, flight training and mechanic training right now to do that. Are there some things that you could say to them that would help them to prepare for that technical evaluation?
Yeah, I would say strive to be a professional, regardless if you're just going up by yourself to have a fun flight or taking up a family member or doing it as a job. Strive to be professional. Do things the correct way, the right way. Try to do them every time the same way. I would also suggest that just hold yourself up to a high standard. So when you're coming into land at a 10,000 foot runway, pick a spot where you want to land and land on that spot. It teaches discipline, self-discipline, and just how to be a better aviator.
Okay. Well, so tell us about the place that you're serving. What is it like, and how has it been different from what you're used to back here at home, and what are some of those things that have been difficult for you and your family to adjust to?
Sure. So we're serving in Papua New Guinea. It's on the north side of Australia, on an island. It borders Indonesia, and it's quite a rural country. Lots of people still live out in what we call the bush or in the jungle. There's most people in this country do not have electricity, running water. They just live by by living off the ground and off the land that God's given them. We actually live in a kind of a remote town, I would call it, in the middle of the highlands. So we live in the mountains. There's over 800 different languages here in Papua New Guinea. Many of them still need translation work to start or have started, but we're still working on those. And many of those places are out in the very remote parts of the country where you can only get there by either airplane or by hiking or walking many, many days to get to these places. So the need for an airplane in this country is quite valuable. And to be honest, most people in the remote villages have either ridden on a plane before they have ridden on a car. So it's very different than in the United States.
So in addition to the flight training, that side of the training that you did with JARS and with Wycliffe, how else did they prepare you for moving your family to literally the other side of the world? And how did they prepare you to be ready to live in a very different culture and in a very different place?
Well, before we arrive here, we have a 2-month training at JARS itself where they talk about culture, how we differ in culture, how we can treat each other, and how to avoid faux pas, so to speak, cultural faux pas. And so the 2-month training was invaluable. I would suggest if you're ever going to live in another country, you need some type of cross-cultural training. And then secondly, when we arrive in PNG, we have another training that's specific to PNG. And we spend, I believe it's 6 weeks just in a course. And then we spend 5 weeks in the village just living with people from PNG and just learning the language here, the local trade language, Tok Pisin. And then we also just learn how to live with them. So it's quite invaluable.
Okay. So Jars and Wycliffe, they didn't just toss you out there and say, go fly. They know the value of being able to work with that culture and understand the cultural differences as best as you can. Obviously, you're not going to grasp it all in weeks' time. In years' time, you're still working on it. But there's more to it than just the flight training side. There's the whole cultural aspect of it as well.
Sure, they know that life overseas is stressful enough, and they want to help prepare you to be here for the long term. Right. So they want us to be here and serve the people across the world.
Well, can you think of something that took you completely by surprise about being on the mission field, something that you just did not expect and was a surprise to you?
I have a couple things. One of them was I'm still shocked of how isolated people are out in this country. I'll be flying over trees, and all of a sudden you'll see a couple of little village houses in the middle of nowhere. And these people are truly isolated, and you can see how there are 800 different languages in this country. Is that it just the terrain and the environment is not suitable for travel by land. The second is more to do with missions, is the constant flow of people. Either they're leaving or coming or going on furlough, or people are changing roles, doing something different than what they came here to do. It's a tough adjustment to have a constant flow of people leaving or coming, and yeah, it's hard to get used to people, your friends maybe leaving to go on furlough or they're coming back. It's a tough transition for sure.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned that you were sort of trained culturally to avoid those cultural faux pas that we tend to make when we go and live with people from another part of the world and with different cultural mindsets. But I imagine that there were times where you did make a cultural faux pas, or there's some occasion where there's a funny story because you didn't understand the language or something along those lines. Do you have anything like that you would like to share?
Yeah, I was flying to this airstrip. It's in the middle of the mountains and in a valley, actually. And there's no road to this place. And as a community service, we help fly coffee out of these places and bring them into the bigger cities so they can be sold and the farmers can make money. And I was flying into this one airstrip to do that and landed and got out of the airplane and said, I'm going to be flying such and such person's coffee. And they looked at each other and said, okay. And then everybody was just standing around looking at me. And I said, is his coffee here? And they said, it is. And I said, okay, you can go get it and I'll get the plane ready. And they just looked at each other and then they started talking amongst themselves. I couldn't quite hear what they were saying. And then two of the guys left and I went to go get the plane ready to load for coffee. And all of a sudden I hear this loud banging and breaking of wood and tearing of metal. And I look out the airplane and I see the people where they're storing the coffee are ripping the side of the wall off of the coffee house. And apparently the person who had the key was in another village far away and wasn't there to open it. And so to get the coffee, they just, instead of telling me that it was all locked up, they just decided, okay, we'll just tear a hole in the wall and give the pilot his coffee. So I always look at that and kind of just laugh.
Now, is that something about their culture where it would have been uncomfortable or inappropriate for them to say, no, you'll have to come back?
Yeah, in their culture, you don't really tell somebody no or I can't do that. They feel like that's shameful to do that to somebody, to tell them that they can't do what you're asking. And so instead of just saying no, that the guy's not here, they went and made it happen, I guess.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's easier for them to tear a wall off a building than it is to tell you no.
Exactly. Makes sense, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, I mean, but that's what you're talking about here when it's about understanding a culture. That something that seems very strange to us, that's not strange to them, and that's part
No,
of
that's
what
normal day. That's normal life. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and we can't judge that or pass judgment on that at all.
No, we can't. Can't.
So, and that's part of getting used to the culture there. So, yeah, that's a really good story. Thank you for sharing it. Why don't we transition now and talk about the airplanes and the flying? These are things that certainly the folks listening to this show are interested in, and so something I'm definitely interested in hearing about as well. Tell us about the plane or the planes that you fly and work with, and the type of flying that you normally do. I know that you're doing things that are focused on promoting Bible translation, but what does that look like? And you've mentioned this flying this coffee. What are the sorts of flying activities that you do, and what are the airplanes that are being used there to accomplish those goals?
Right now, we have narrowed our airplanes to just one type of airplane. We're flying the Kodiak, which is a great bush airplane. And so we fly that around the country, and we serve not only translators, but also other missionaries as well. So we fly them in and out of the remote areas of PNG or Papua New Guinea. So we do about 80% of mission work, and then between 10 to 15, maybe up to 20% of what we call community service or commercial work. And so we not only want to meet the physical or the spiritual needs of the people here, we also want to help them physically. And so we help fly them out, either their coffee or fly in store goods. They don't have stores where these people live, so we fly in food, rice, noodles, and all sorts of other stuff. We also help them if someone's hurt. They'll give us a call, and we'll do a medevac. So we'll fly them out of the villages and into the bigger cities where they're better hospitals. And we also do a small portion of commercial work, which helps us subsidize the cost for translators or other missionaries. So it helps lower the cost of flying for the other people who use our airplane.
How many Wycliffe pilots are in Papua New Guinea, and how many are sort of based in the same location as you?
We have 8 to 9 Kodiak pilots, and then we have 2 to 3 helicopter pilots. So we also have 2 helicopters as well. So we have 4 Kodiaks and 2 helicopters. We are all based in what we call Ukarumpa. That's where we're at. And we're all based there, but we do fly to a region of the country, and we'll spend the night out in that region and do work, and then fly back the next day or in a couple days back to Ukarumpa. But we're all based in Ukarumpa.
Okay, so Wycliffe has a single base in PNG, and you take trips to different parts of the country and do your work there, and maybe stay the night and then come back.
That's correct. That's correct.
So, just for curiosity's sake, because I'm interested, and I know other folks are interested as well, what other sorts of planes have you flown in your training? You mentioned the Helio Courier that you flew with when you were training at JARS. What about the planes that you flew at Moody?
The main trainer at Moody was the Cessna 172. We also flew a Cessna 185 and a 182 retractable gear, as well as the Cessna 206. So those were the planes at Moody that we flew. By far, I guess my favorite one of those was the 185. It was quite an exciting airplane to fly. And then after that, I got some time in a Pilatus PC-6, which was really fun. Another tail dragger. Cool. That was a fun airplane to fly. Super Cub, a home built called a Christavia. That was a neat airplane, kind of like a Champ. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I got to fly lots of cool airplanes. A Cirrus, been able to fly a Cirrus.
All right.
But are you saying that out of all of those, the 185 was your favorite, or was that just your favorite at Moody?
That was just my favorite movie. I think the Kodiak is one of my favorites, as well as the PC-6. PC-6 is a very versatile airplane, but the Kodiak is the people who designed it to fit a niche, and it really works well here in PNG. It's faster than the PC-6, maybe not by much, but it is, and that makes up a big difference when we're flying all over the country, and it can land in short distances, and it carries quite a bit as well. So yeah, it's a good airplane.
Yeah, from what I have learned about it and know about it, it seems like the perfect plane for the type of flying that you're doing, and I guess that makes sense because that is what they designed it for, correct?
Correct, yeah.
So how would you say that flying there in Papua New Guinea compares to the flying that you were doing back home?
I would say when you pull back on the yoke, the airplane goes up, and you push down on the yoke and the airplane goes down. That's about the only similarity. Flying in PNG is very different than the States. We have no radar coverage except for in one small city. No reliable weather info. We have to call people on the ground or radio them. And if they really want us, they'll kind of not give the whole story, I guess I should say. The weather is ever changing. We deal with trade winds instead of fronts. We don't have frontal weather. We have wind. Our weather is driven by the wind, and the terrain is, I know it's very different from Alabama. Alabama is quite flat, and here we have mountains rising all the way up to 15,000 feet, and then we have also flatlands. So we have everything in between. So it's quite different here.
Interesting. What would you say is the most exciting part about being a missionary pilot there?
Most exciting, I would say the landings are some of the most challenging. Some of the airstrips are the most challenging in the world. They're literally hanging off the sides of mountains. They have slopes up to 19%, and some of the airstrips are as short as 300 meters or 900 feet. And on takeoff, we have to decide whether we're going to take off the moment we release our brakes, or our abort points are brake release. So it's quite intense. The terrain is amazing. It's amazing to see God's design amongst this country. It's just so beautiful and varied. We have jungle to dry land to plains. It's just amazing to see. But I think the most exciting thing I get to see is when we actually deliver Bibles to a people group that haven't heard or seen God's word in their own language. And it's just, I get emotional just thinking about it, and I see these missionaries as we deliver them to these villages to deliver Bibles, and how they've spent their whole lives doing this one thing, and it's coming to an end, and they're giving the people there God's word, and that's what I get excited about. I think that's really cool.
Yeah, something that we just take for granted. I mean, I'm sitting here in my office, and if I wanted to look around, I mean, I don't know how many Bibles that I have sitting in my office, and however number of different translations, and we forget that there are people living in parts of the world who do not have the Bible in their own language, who do not have a complete Bible in their own language, and that there are individuals working diligently to make that happen. And there are folks like you who are working to facilitate that through transporting these translators, and then eventually the final product out to very grateful people. So yeah, that is a really good story for you to share. Now you've mentioned that the airstrips are some of the most challenging in the world. What else would you say is difficult about the flying aspect of your work there?
I would say weather is always an issue. We could fly 20 minutes away from our home base and land. And by the time we take off, the weather is totally different, very to the point to where we may not be able to get back home and we'll have to land somewhere else and stay the evening or wait till the weather clears up. The weather's changes so rapidly here that it can be very challenging, as well as the terrain, since the terrain just rises out of the ground so quickly and so high. You're never sure if you're going to be able to get around this mountain because of clouds are in the way or what. So I would definitely say weather and terrain are the most challenging factors of flying here in PNG.
Yeah, it was interesting to hear you talking about the fact that in the States, our weather really is controlled by frontal systems. And for the most part, if I want to know what the weather is going to be tomorrow in Alabama, I look over in Mississippi, right? And there's usually a front moving from west to east and so forth. But if it's not too difficult for us to understand, could you help us a little bit understand how the weather does work there? Are you saying that there's just no rhyme or reason to how the weather develops?
We have 2 seasons in PNG. It's usually a northwest wind or a southeast wind. And depending on those winds, kind of gives us a clue of what the weather is going to be like. So when the wind's blowing one particular direction, it will drive the weather up into the mountains on that side of the range. And usually the other side of the ranges is going to be better. Not always great, but better, and vice versa. It's always difficult to anticipate what's going to happen with the winds like that, because sometimes the weather is beautiful, and other days you may not be able to take off. And it all just varies on what the weather and the moisture content is of that day.
All right. Well, I appreciate you sharing that with us. Tell me about some of your best memories or favorite stories from the mission field. You mentioned that you have really enjoyed seeing a Bible translation arrive at a particular place with missionaries who have been working on that for years, sometimes decades, and seeing the excitement of the people there. Are there some other stories or maybe some particular examples of those sorts of things that years from now, when you are no longer out on the mission field and are sitting back thinking about it, are there some things that have happened that will stand out to you think, for the rest of your life?
One story is I was able to deliver a translator and some Audi Bibles. We call them Audi Bibles because they're audio Bibles, because many people here can't read, but it was an audio Bible in their language. And when they started to hear the Bible being presented through that speaker, tears just started rolling down this person's face and just started to hug the translator. And it was amazing to see that just how passionate this person was to actually finally to receive the word of God in their own language. Another thing I really enjoy about flying here in PNG is you get to fly the same missionaries all over, and you start to develop relationships with them. And one family, they have a daughter, and I was flying that family out quite a bit, and finally the daughter started calling me her pilot. And so she would be, "Hey, Mom, there's my pilot." And we'd be at the store, and I'd see her, and she'd be like, "Hey, there's my pilot." It's just neat to be able to develop those relationships as well as you're flying people all around the country.
Yeah, I bet so. That's really cool. Well, also, I know that amidst the excitement and the stories like what you have just shared, that there have undoubtedly been struggles along the way. I imagine there were struggles with your flight training. Maybe there were financial struggles. I know that oftentimes that the finances required to complete your training are steep. And maybe you would like to share about some of the struggles getting to the mission field, maybe even down to, a particular maneuver that you struggled with, or a particular rating, or maybe even a failed check ride along the way. why don't you shed some light on those things for the folks listening?
Sure. In my initial training, the thing that I struggled with the most was, I'm kind of embarrassed to admit this, but radio calls. Oh, radio calls were always the hardest for me. I would sit there and practice it before I'd say it, but once I pushed that button, my mind would go into a blank and I would just mess up everything I was trying to say, and then my instructor would have to quickly get on the radio and fix everything I just messed up. And so I never thought I would be able to just confidently talk through the radio. But I struggled through it, and now I'm here in PNG, and where they talk with heavy accents and the radios don't work so well, and we're using HF, and I can barely understand them, but I'm making it through, and I'm making radio calls like I was born to do it. So that was one thing I always struggled with. Finances. Man, finances are tough. Flying is expensive. And I thought we were crazy, but when we first started flight school, Janice and I really felt like God was asking us to take a leap of faith and try to get through flight school debt-free. And I didn't think we'd be able to do it, but I said, if you want us to try, I'll try. And it was amazing how God provided through either scholarships or our local church helping us out, or people giving generously. We even actually had a church in Spokane who had a food bank, and they would let us come in and we would be able to get food and just to help cut down on costs. And we ate beans and rice a lot. But through that all, God allowed us to get through school debt-free. And we feel so blessed and amazed that God could do such a miraculous thing. It was definitely not easy, but we feel like God was faithful through it all.
Yeah, there's no question. That is not something that you did on your own, because it is very expensive, and most folks do not and are not able to make it through without debt. So that's a great testimony to God's faithfulness, and probably to some creativity on your own part as well, but mostly to God's faithfulness there. So yeah, thank you for sharing both of those things. I am curious, going back to the you probably want me to leave this alone, but going back to the struggles with the radio work, that's a common struggle, right? For guys or gals who are in flight training. Is there anything that you could recommend for someone who may be listening that's having that same struggle?
Yeah, if your instructor or somebody you know could just write out what to say and most importantly, what you anticipate to hear back. I think that's a big key, is what do you expect the person to say when you call them? Knowing what people are going to say makes life so much easier. So if you can learn what people are going to be saying, or even going on to, I know there's apps out there that you can listen to ATC transactions and stuff. That, I think that helps out so much. And just even if you have to, just practice it on the ground. I know I would sit in the Cessna 172 by myself, just pretending I was flying and acting out what I would say when I took off and what I'd say when I was departing the area. And eventually all that pretending paid off.
Yeah, the sort of the armchair flying, or the couch flying, and working through those radio calls, and yeah, the apps like Live ATC, I think that's some good advice. You can, for folks who aren't familiar with Live ATC, it's an app that you can download on your phone. They have a website too, I believe, at liveatc.net, and you can pick an airport and listen to the communications between the pilots and the controllers at those airports, and I think that would be a very helpful tool. I know that would have been helpful to me years ago when I was learning to fly, because it can be difficult to do, and it is intimidating, and you do key that mic and get that mic right. So what you're describing, I think, is something that most of us struggle with, at least a little bit along the way. Well, what would you say were some of the biggest obstacles that you dealt with in getting to the mission field?
Definitely flight hours. That's a hard one for us to get as pilots, is to get enough hours to where we can actually join a mission or get a job. I waited, I think, 6 or 7 months before I finally got a job that was able to help me get the flight hours, but I just put out applications everywhere, and finally God provided through a fellow believer at Auburn University. Another obstacle is just the amount of time it can take to get to the field. I know when I started flight training, to the point where we actually got here in country was about 10 years. And that's a long time. And
wow.
It just seems like forever sometimes. And it can seem discouraging, but I would just say hang in there and just trust God knows what he's doing and where he's leading you, and just keep preparing and keep doing your best. And along the way, just trust God.
Yeah, and would you say that part of that time of waiting and persevering is really God is using that to prepare you for where you're going to be and what you're going to have to endure and persevere while you're there?
I would say most definitely. I mean, I talked earlier about how we were assigned to go to Cameroon, Africa, but all along we believe God was leading us toward Papua New Guinea. And we just needed that extra time for God to mold us and shape us and get us ready for our time to serve here. It was definitely, it was hard when we found out we were not going to Cameroon, but we felt like, God's in control, and we just weren't ready to go to PNG when we thought, and now we are. And so, yeah, it was tough.
Yeah, God certainly wasn't surprised that there was a change of plans, right? He knew that all along and was using that for some purpose. And we don't always know those purposes, but he's in control. And the change of plans wasn't a surprise to him. He was orchestrating that change of plans all along.
Exactly.
What about struggles that you have dealt with since being on the mission field?
Good question. Struggles. Friends leaving because parents are sick and they need to go take care of them, or they're just going, they feel like their time here is done and they're going to start a new life back in their home country. That's always a struggle.
And friends are really your family when you're on the mission field, right?
Exactly. Friends are your family. It's tough. Speaking of family, since we've been here, we've had 4 nieces born and that we've never met. So that's been a struggle too, is family back home that we're missing their life.
Mm-hmm.
So we're excited to when we go on furlough to be able to meet our 4 nieces. So that, yeah.
So friends who have become more like family to you, leaving for a variety of reasons, and those people who are your family being a long ways away from you, and life moving on for them, and you not being able to be a part of it, and your life moving on and them not being a part of it. You would say those are some of the bigger struggles that you've had to deal with?
Yeah, definitely.
Well, tell me about, we've talked about family and friends and the difficulties that are related to them leaving, to you being so far away from them. But I also suspect that family and friends have been very helpful to you along the way and very encouraging to you as you were there. Would you like to share any of those types of stories with us?
Yeah, our family has supported us from the very beginning. They knew it'd be hard for us to leave, but they said, if God is calling you to go overseas and serve, then that's where you need to be, because that's the best place to be. They've never doubted us or doubted God, and they've always just been behind us, supporting us fully, not only prayerfully, but just with encouraging words. And our church back home has also been wonderful. They have done so much throughout the years to either help us get here, throwing fundraisers, or just allowing us to share, or even just having our friends back in our church just be accountability partners and just keeping us on the right path. And when we get discouraged, encouraging us. And it's just been it's wonderful to have a good group of friends and family supporting you.
Would you say that there is a person or maybe a few persons who have served as a mentor to you along the way?
I haven't had just one person. I've had just several people throughout my just life in different various points. As I had one instructor at Moody, just was able to speak into my life. And then when we were in Spokane, an elderly man, he would ask me the hard questions and he was just teach me how to be a good teacher. At that time, we were helping out with Sunday school class, and he was mentoring us in how to lead a cross-cultural Sunday school class. That was really neat. And just friends at church, just always willing to ask the hard questions. If I'm doing all right, how are you doing? You seem a little bit down, but yeah, it was always good.
Well, do you have any final suggestions or advice or encouragement for prospective missionary pilots?
Yeah, I would just say prepare for the journey that God has ahead of you. There might be a long road ahead of you to the mission field. It's going to be a blessing in many ways, but it's also going to be hard and trying. And at some points, he may be refining you, and refining doesn't always feel good, and it can be tough, but push through that tough time, and you'll be a better person for it in the end, and you'll be able to say that you made it through, and that you're able to serve a wonderful God.
All right, great advice there. I wonder if there's a book that was helpful to you along the way that you would like to recommend to our listeners. And again, it can be something about missionary aviation. It could be something that helped you grow in your Christian walk, or even something that was useful when you were learning to fly. And I'm just curious if there's something that you would like to share.
Yeah, when I was first started to become more interested in mission aviation, I read the book Through the Gates of Splendor by Elizabeth Elliot, and it was such an encouragement to see through her eyes the life of Nate Saint and other things that she went through in her life, and it was just a huge encouragement, and it pushed me more toward serving God.
Very good. That is an outstanding book, and I appreciate you sharing it with our listeners. Well, Fran, how can our audience be praying for you and for your family?
Yeah, one thing is for safety in flight. While we're flying, we fly in a rugged area. Also, this is a big one, just being able to manage the stresses of life and ministry here in Papua New Guinea. And that I'll be a godly dad and a husband who points my family to Christ, both in good times and in the hard times. We also have an upcoming furlough in June 2019, and it's just a lot of work preparing to come back to the States, and stressful at the same time. So just preparing to come back to the States in 2019.
Okay, well, I will definitely be praying for you in those areas. I will add these to the show notes for this episode, and we will have other folks, I'm sure, praying for you as well. And I'll also add the book that you mentioned to the show notes as well, so people can refer to these things that you have mentioned by going to the website and looking for this episode. Could you tell us about the ways that people could connect with you, whether it be on social media or through Wycliffe, if they wanted to learn more about you and continue to pray for you and maybe even support you in your ministry and financially or otherwise?
Yeah, there's a Wycliffe website called wycliffe.org. If you go to the Give section, you can search for Fran and Janice Burgess. And if you'd like to give there, you can. And they give you a step-by-step way to do that. You could also reach me on Facebook. My name on Facebook is Francis Burgess. So Francis Burgess. And friend me on Facebook.
Very good. And I will make sure to include all those things in the show notes as well, so people will have a way to connect with you if they would like to. Well, Fran, let me just say that I really appreciate this opportunity that I've had tonight. You've been an outstanding guest today, and I have enjoyed hearing your stories, and I know that our listeners are going to enjoy them as well. I really appreciate the time that you have taken to help us all better understand missionary aviation and the many ways that God is using people like you around the world. And I do hope that we can continue to stay in touch, and please know that I will be praying for God's blessings on you and your family.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to share and for this podcast. Thank you very much.
Well, that's it for this episode. We thank you once again for listening. You can learn more about the podcast and subscribe to it by visiting plainfaith.com. That's PLANE faith.com. You will also find links there to connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. If you are interested in becoming a patron of the show, you can do that as well by visiting patreon.com/plainfaith. And of course, Jimmy would love to hear from you personally. So feel free to email him at jimmy@plainfaith.com or by using the contact form on our website. Until next time, remember that God made him to be sin who knew no sin, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God.
The intro and outro music for the Plain Faith podcast is a song called Chipper by Kevin MacLeod. You can find his work at incompetech.com.